Hey everybody, Dr. O'Neill here. This is going to be our first review. I can't call them unit reviews anymore because I've broken them down into more bite-sized chunks, and the reason I've done that is because I want you to come back and review portions of them wherever you're struggling rather than having to go through an entire unit review. So I'm going to jump right in here. Reminder, I think it's very important that as you go through these reviews, you see what you can answer on your own first, and then hunt down the answers to the questions you can't figure out. So come to this lecture review after you have a pretty solid understanding, and let me kind of fill in the cracks, maybe give you some examples or analogies that will help you learn this content. So struggling to find these things on your own, struggling to learn is a very important part of the learning process. So don't allow your learning to become too passive because I do these types of things. So I do them because I'm your teacher, and I want to teach you the key concepts, whether we're in a face-to-face class together, a hybrid, or an online class, doesn't matter to me. I'm your teacher, and I haven't done my job until you've learned. So I do want to make sure you know the answers to these questions, but I really, really hope that you're kind of figuring this stuff out on yourselves and synthesizing new information, all of that. The other thing here with these reviews, you know, they're obviously unit reviews, but when I make unit exams, I ask questions that are important. So you could see this as a test review as well, but not everything on my exams will be on this review. Not everything on the review will be on the exam. I actually don't, I make the two completely separate of each other, but I put important things on my reviews. I put important things on the exams. So if you know this material, you're definitely pointed or headed in the right direction when it comes exam time. So I won't do this spiel at the beginning of every review. This is going to be where you start. So let's go ahead and jump right in. All right, first one. It is important to understand how to define the name of the class you are taking. Understand the difference between anatomy and physiology. So anatomy is the study of structure, whereas physiology is the study of function. But I really like teaching the two together. There are courses that teach you all the anatomy in one semester, then all the physiology in another semester. I actually don't like doing it that way because the structure is needed to understand the function. So to me, when you're taking a physiology class, you basically have to go back and review the anatomy anyways. So that's a term that you're constantly going to hear me say. Structure determines function, just like a key. Yeah, a key is a great thing, but will it open that lock? You know, its specific structure will determine what it can do. So that's anatomy, the study of structure, how we're built. Physiology, the study of function, is how we perform. So hopefully, as you go through this course, you'll be able to look at something, see how it's built, see what kind of cells it's made of, see what kind of organelles are in those cells, see what kind of tissues it's made of, and you can actually hopefully make sense then of what it does. So why does a liver cell look different than a skin cell? Well, as we'll learn in this course, they have completely different functions. So that's anatomy and that's physiology, and the two are just intimately connected. If you want to look for something you may already have an understanding of, maybe you know a lot about cars. So I don't, but to me, a mechanic is looking at the anatomy and physiology of a car. This piece of this car is designed this way to do this thing. So think of the same thing with the human body. What is it designed to do and how does it function? So, and then of course, if an organ or a system or a structure is designed to do something and it can no longer do it, that's when you have problems. That's when you start to head down the path of disease and potentially death. So that's why learning normal anatomy and physiology is important. But for most of you, because you're heading down health science paths, what happens when it quits functioning properly is actually going to be what's more important to you, and that would be pathology, the study of disease states. All right, second one here. Understand the levels of organization from the atom all the way up to the organism. This is also a great preview for the structures and functions of the organ systems. It's especially important to know about the organ systems that we will cover this semester. So in A&P 1, or early in A&P, you learn the integumentary system, skeletal system, muscular system, and nervous system. Now, if you're taking my Essentials of Anatomy class, or you're taking a class that's designed differently, of course, in this course, you might be learning the endocrine system or others, but these are the ones that you generally are going to start with. So let's start at the beginning. Understand the levels of organization. So there's a reason that anatomy textbooks and anatomy classes are structured this way. You start learning the basic biochemistry, atoms and molecules and compounds. And then we build them. Atoms, molecules, and compounds are used to make the next level for me is the organelle level. A lot of times people skip that level. You go straight from like that chemical level to the cell. But organelles are the microscopic miniature machines that power your cells. So you take these non-living organelles and you put them together, and now we have a cell. So we go atoms, molecules, and compounds into the organelle level. into the cell level. Now the cell is the basic unit of life. This is where you take this unbelievable leap forward where we take these non-living building blocks and you create a living cell out of it. So that's the cell level. Cytology will be the study of those cells. Then when you put multiple cells together that perform a similar function, you now have a tissue. So you go from the cellular level to the tissue level. The study of these tissues is going to be histology. And as we'll learn in a little while, your entire body is made of one of 4 tissue types: epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and neural tissue. So all the cells, the hundreds of cell types you have, are going to function together in one of these 4 tissue types. Then when you take 2 or more tissues together that are working together on a common goal, you now have an organ. So put multiple cells together to make a tissue, multiple tissues together to make an organ. Then when you put multiple organs together with a shared function or group of functions, you now have an organ system. And to me, that is the most important level of organization for this class, because that's how most anatomy classes are going to be broken down, by organ system. But then when you put all of your 11 organ systems together, we'll learn 12 because you have the male and female reproductive system. They have to be learned separately. They're wildly different. When you take those 11 organ systems and put them together, you now have the human, the organism. So you started at the atomic level, atoms, compounds, and molecules, to the organelle level, to the cell level, tissue level, organ level, organ system level, where we spend 80% of our time this semester, then the organism level. Just I want to let you know, whatever class of mine you're in, or if you just found this video somewhere, it's very, very important. Now, when we teach anatomy, we deconstruct it. We tear the body apart into its smallest pieces so that we can learn it. But we don't spend much time putting it back together. So what I like to have my students do is to really focus on, how does this organ system work with this one? What's the function of this organ that ties it to this other organ or organ systems? So that's the term holistic. Now people think that is kind of a woo-woo term, but to me, holistic just means that if you're going to go into the health sciences, you're treating your patients like an entire human being. If you're a gastroenterologist, your patients they're not just a GI tract with feet. If you're a neurologist, they don't just have a nervous system. So, and we're learning more and more about how the gut can affect the brain can affect the gut, etc. So we know that the entire body is interwoven together for a reason, and that's what makes it so amazing. But we don't spend much time really focusing on that. So your job at the end of an introductory anatomy class like this is to start to put all that together, to start to see how blood functions with bone, etc., etc. So to make all those connections, that's when you truly understand this material. You can create a massive pile of flashcards and learn a ton of stuff, but when you truly understand this, you've put it back together. All right. So especially important to know, this is just a real quick preview then of the organ systems that are covered early in anatomy class. The integumentary system, that's going to be the skin and associated structures. So when you think of skin, I'm just real big picture here. The main things you're probably thinking is protection. It's a barrier between you and the outside world. So it keeps pathogens and things out of your body that it needs to, but it also keeps things in. So if you have a burn victim, one of the main problems is they're going to be losing water. So it keeps water in, so you're going to get dehydrated and you're going to get infections without skin. So those are two big ones, but they also help. Your integumentary system also helps regulate body temperature. To me, your skin and blood basically function like a radiator. That's why when you're warm, blood rushes to your skin, so sweat evaporation can cool you off. When you're cold, blood rushes away from your skin to keep your core warm. So it plays a big role in regulating temperature. Your skin is needed to synthesize vitamin D, which we now know regulates thousands of genes, and it protects you from 17 different types of cancers. So there's a lot to learn about the integumentary system, but you probably never thought of it as part of your immune system. Of course, this physical barrier, part of your fluid control system, part of your endocrine system, et cetera, et cetera. So very important organ system right out of the gate. Next, we have the skeletal system. So when you think of your skeleton, imagine, I have a little book I have with my son Oliver. Imagine if you didn't have bones. You'd just be a pile of muscles and fat and skin laying on the ground. So when you think bones, you should think protection. My rib cage is protecting my heart, protecting my lungs, these kind of things. So protection certainly, but then movement. Your muscles can't do anything without being attached to bones to actually allow for movement. So yes, movement, yes, protection, but your bones are also where blood cells are produced. So we often forget about that. Your red bone marrow is where blood cells are produced. But then the main function to me of the skeletal system is actually as a mineral storage depot. So you think that the most important thing about your bones is staying strong, but your body, that's where your body puts the minerals like calcium and magnesium and molybdenum and boron and all these things that it needs for the future. And it will gladly take them, making your bones weaker if it has to. So your body's idea of why bones are important and your idea, not wanting to get osteoporosis, are wildly different. The muscular system. So we know movement, but also protection. It protects parts of your body that aren't covered in bone. It plays, your sphincters, they play a role in controlling movement throughout your body. So we'll learn about the 3 different types of muscle in the muscular system. So movement is obviously a big one. But another one is generating heat. Your muscle's very metabolically active, and the number one byproduct of your metabolism is heat. So it's because of the law of thermodynamics. We'll cover that later. But so the generation of heat is a function of the muscular system you may not have thought of. Nervous system. So the nervous system, if you have time, I do like teaching the nervous and endocrine systems together, but generally in most anatomy classes it doesn't work out that way. So the nervous system and the endocrine system are going to be your 2 primary homeostatic control systems. We'll learn that term in the next point, which is the maintenance of a stable internal environment. So when I think of the nervous system, I think it responds to the world. So you have your sensations, your sensory receptors sending information to your brain and spinal cord. It responds to the world, but it perceives what's going on around it and then also responds. So it tells your muscles and glands and everything else what to do. So your nervous system is 1/2 of your body's primary control system, maintaining the requirements of life, basically. But the nervous system, it works really quickly. That's its advantage, but its responses end really quickly too. So the nervous system kind of monitors your body millisecond by millisecond. Your endocrine system responds really slowly. Like if you removed your thyroid gland, you probably wouldn't even notice for a couple weeks. It responds really slowly, but the responses last a long time. So you could say quick things are controlled by your nervous system, like, I touch a hot plate, withdrawal reflex kind of thing. More long-term things, growth, development, pregnancy, are controlled by your endocrine system. But as we'll learn, your nervous system controls your endocrine system. So it truly is your primary control system of your body, is the nervous system. All right, that's the 10,000-foot preview of those early organ systems that we're going to cover. Next point, define homeostasis. So homeostasis is the maintenance of a stable internal environment. What I like to say about this is it is way easier to be dead than to be alive. So to be alive, think about all the things that have to happen every second about, maintaining your pH and blood pressure and temperature and all the chemical composition of your blood and body fluids, and constantly keeping your nerves alive using pumping mechanisms, etc. Just imagine how hard it is to be alive. It takes somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 quintillion proteins a day for you to survive. Your body's constantly churning out hemoglobin and building new cells and breaking down and recycling old cells. Maintaining a stable internal environment, which means even when you go outside, whether it's 120 degrees or 20 degrees below zero, your core temperature stays about the same. Whether you're exercising or sleeping, your body maintains appropriate blood pressure in most situations. So that's what I mean by maintaining a stable internal environment. You're teetering on this razor's edge of improbability. So much easier to have never existed, so much easier to be dead. So staying alive takes maintaining homeostasis, controlling this environment. In an ever-changing world, whether you ate 5 minutes ago or 5 days ago, your body can keep you alive. That's what maintaining a stable internal environment looks like. So homeostasis, probably the most important term you're going to learn in anatomy class. How do you maintain this environment? Because a stable environment means you're healthy, you're well, hopefully, you don't have any diseases. So you go to the doctor, they look at your blood, your labs, all your blood tests and stuff, and everything's right there in the middle of the normal range. If things are low, things are high, you're having a hard time maintaining homeostasis. And then if you do that long enough, if these things get too far away from normal or for too long, you will have a disease and or die. So think about your normal temperature range. If your temperature gets too high with the fever, it can lead to febrile seizures and organ failure. If it gets too low, same thing can happen. So think about you fall in icy water, these kind of things. So that's what homeostasis is, and that's why it's critically important. Okay. Excuse me. Understand the difference between negative and positive feedback loops. So to maintain homeostasis, feedback loops are going to start with the receptor. So you're going to be sensing the world around you. These are all things we'll learn later, like it's a proprioceptor, it knows where your body is in space. If it's a baroreceptor, it knows how much pressure is in something. If it's a thermoreceptor, it knows what temperature something is, give or take. Basically, if it's hot or cold. So those receptors are going to send information to your central nervous system, your brain and spinal cord, and then you're going to process that information. If things are right as rain, then we keep them that way. If they're not, we have to do an effect. So then your motor nerves are going to go to your effectors, which will be things like skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, glands, fat. All these things we'll learn about later. But so that's normal feedback mechanisms. You sense the world around you and you make changes as needed. So let's look like blood sugar. If you just ate a bunch of pancakes and syrup and stuff, your blood sugar is going to be climbing and climbing and climbing. Well, your body should notice that, and it should fix that by releasing insulin, which will store that glucose in your cells, use it for fuel, and your blood sugar should stabilize. If you haven't ate in 24 hours, your blood sugar might be dipping and dipping and dipping. Your body will notice that, and it will do things to raise your blood sugar, make new glucose, release it from stores, etc. So that's how your body uses these feedback systems to maintain a stable internal environment. Now, negative and positive feedback loops are completely different. So here's how I look at it. With a negative feedback loop, when there's a change, like your blood sugar climbing, what's your body want to do? Bring it back to normal. So negative feedback means when there's a change, your body will respond by eliminating that change, restoring the stable internal environment. So that's almost every feedback system is going to be negative feedback because you're already there. You're already in homeostasis. So if things are changing, it's generally going to be bad news. So we're going to rein it back in. Your body temperature starts to climb, let's cool you off. Your blood pressure starts to climb, let's bring it down. You're running low on blood cells, let's make more. Those kind of things. So that's negative feedback. There's a change, your body tries to negate or get rid of that change. Positive feedback's the opposite. When there's a change, it actually accelerates more change. So positive feedback is going to be used in emergencies, when things need to happen super, super quickly. So the two key examples, the next point here, what are the two key examples of positive feedback? That's blood clotting and labor and delivery. So let's imagine, let's imagine that these things were flipped. And let's say your blood sugar is starting to climb because you just had a real high carb breakfast. That negative feedback says, hey, let's keep blood sugar normal. What if it was accidentally positive feedback? Oh, their blood sugar's climbing. Let's do everything we can to get it to climb even higher. Like the goal would be to get your blood glucose to 1,000. So that's a terrible thing. But on the flip side, if your blood is clotting and your body notices this clotting cascade is kicking in, hey, our blood's starting to clot. What we don't want to happen is our body to say, hey, we need to stop that. Let's stop this blood clotting because we would bleed to death. Our blood clotting cascade makes our blood clot 1,000,000 times faster than it would if we didn't have this cool cascade mechanism. We'll learn that later. So there are times we need positive feedback. Or imagine if you've had a child or you're pregnant and thinking about it, these kind of things. Imagine if you go into labor, you start to deliver a child, and your body says, something's changing. We need to negate this change. We need to stop this. That would be a terrible thing. You got to get that baby out as soon as you can. So that's negative and positive feedback, and that's how they work, and thankfully they work the way they do. But just to reiterate, what are the two key examples of positive feedback? That's blood clotting and labor and delivery. You could say stress response systems are positive feedback. In some ways, things like the micturition or urination reflexes has some positive feedback attributes. Defecation, same thing. So there are other ones, but those are the two key ones you need to know. All right, no, I'm not going to go through all this stuff here, but know the key surface anatomy terms. I have to add a page here so I can scroll. Okay, know the key surface anatomy terms that were covered in the lecture content. So that's going to be things like, I won't go through them all here, but make sure you know surface anatomy terms. First of all, why? So why do you need to know that the chin is the mental region? Why do you need to know that the armpit is the axilla, the arm is the brachium, these types of things? Well, it just because that's we're learning the language of the human body, and it's very important to know those. But let's say you do now know that the armpit is the axilla when you use proper surface anatomy terms. Well, you now know where the axillary artery is, the axillary vein is, and the axillary nerve is. So now it's not the case in every single thing, but like now that once you know that the forehead is the frontal region, well, you now know where the frontal bone is. So every minute you spend learning these surface anatomy terms is going to pay off. It's going to pay off right now because you need to know these terms, but it's going to pay off when you learn your muscles, your bones, your joints, your arteries, veins, and nerves. So take the time to learn these terms now, or you're going to just have to be relearning and rememorizing in the future, which isn't the best way to go through this class. All right. I don't know. I mean, there's so many of them. Like your wrist is carpus. I can't go through them all here, but make sure you find some content of mine or otherwise that teaches you these terms. All right, next, same thing here. Know the directional terms that were covered in the directional terminology lab. The key terms are anterior, posterior, superior, inferior, medial, lateral, and proximal, distal. So directional terms, first thing you have to note is they're a term that only makes sense in relation to something else. If I say that the elbow is inferior, inferior to what? So directional terms are always comparing two things. That's the first thing to note. And then you should know all of them. There are some that aren't used as often, like cranial and caudal. But before we talk about directional terms, again, where's my elbow in space? When in doubt, unless you're told otherwise, you're in the anatomical position, which is standing, standing erect, upright, palms facing forward, feet facing forward, eyes facing forward. So everything facing forward, the palms being the key. So that's the anatomical position. And then if you take someone and you have them lay on their belly, they're now prone. When I think of prone, I think of the little green army guy crawling on the ground. And then if they're on their back, they're supine. So remember, if you're supine, you're on your spine. So we'll cover the movement terms later, but let's just go through this list here, but these are not the only ones. Anterior and posterior. Anterior means towards the front. Posterior means towards the back. Because we're bipedal animals and we're standing up, our anterior is also our ventral region, but that wouldn't be the case if I was on all fours. And then posterior is going to be dorsal. Think dorsal fin on a shark or a dolphin. Superior means towards the top, inferior towards the bottom. Medial means towards the middle. That's a good one. Lateral, away from the midline. So medial, towards the midline. Lateral, away from the midline. And then proximal and distal, first thing to note here, these are the key terms when you're talking about limbs. Because to say that my elbow is inferior to my shoulder is only true if my arm's down. If my arm's at its side or up, the elbow is no longer inferior to the shoulder. But it's always going to be distal. So proximal means closer to the trunk or origin. Distal means farther away. So definitely remember that. That's the key term to use with limbs, your appendages, arms and legs. Okay, what organs are in the pleural cavity, the pericardial cavity, and the peritoneal cavity? So your pleural cavity is where your lungs are. The pericardial cavity, think cardial, cardiac, is where your heart is. And your peritoneal cavity is where most of your abdominal pelvic organs are. We will learn later that some organisms are retroperitoneal, and some parts of organs as well. So pleural cavity, think lungs. Pericardial, think heart. Peritoneal, think abdominal pelvic. These cavities are going to be double layered. So that's, you look at, these are called your ventral body cavities. And so you're going to have a visceral pleura. Viscera means organ. So the visceral pleura is the layer right on a lung. The parietal pleura, parietal means body wall, so it's going to be the lining that lines the cavity that the lung is in. And the reason that's important is because those two layers have a real watery fluid in them that reduces friction. So when your lungs move, when they expand and relax, when you breathe in and breathe out, you're not getting any friction. If you've ever had pleurisy, you know that friction in your lungs is a bad idea. So that's the visceral versus parietal layers, which we'll cover again in just a moment. So those are your three cavities. What is the mediastinum? The mediastinum is the space between your two lungs. So that means your heart's there, but so are your great vessels, like your aorta, the parts of the esophagus and these kind of things. So it's when you're explaining where something is, you want to be as specific as you can. So if you ask me where the heart is, I can certainly say it's in the thoracic cavity, which means it's above the diaphragm. I could say it's in the mediastinum because it is between the two lungs. But the most specific way to say where the heart is in the pericardial cavity. But all these terms are important. This is the language of anatomy that you're going to be speaking. All right, last point here. What is the difference between the parietal and visceral layers of these divisions? So, like I said before, parietal means body wall, visceral means organ. So the visceral layer is on the organ, the parietal layer lines the cavity. And what they do is they reduce friction when your organs move. You wouldn't want there to be pain or heat or every time your bowel moved, every time your heart beat, etc. So that's why these layers are there, and that's what they're called. So, all right, that is the intro to anatomy review. Get your learn on, guys.